I'm here to talk about microconsoles and OUYA. As a sort of slight background to, I guess, who I am, that's who I am. I wrote a couple of kind of key pieces last year that sort of accidentally ended up coining a term, microconsole, and talked a lot about sort of what I thought these new kind of weird Android boxes or Android-ish boxes that seemed low-powered and all that sort of stuff, what they might do in comparison to what was obviously going to be a very big year for Xbox and PlayStation 4 and all that sort of stuff. And as a term, it kind of stuck, and subsequent to that, I actually went to work for OUYA about 4 months ago, where I'm now kind of, if you like, on the front line of, rather than just talking about it in theory. And yeah, and it's proving to be quite a lot of fun. So I'm probably going to bang through quite a lot of slides here today, so, and I will try and make some time for questions at the end, but bear with me if it does all run a bit long. So, OK, microconsoles essentially are a little big idea. So you're all hopefully slightly familiar with the idea that there's been things like the Game Pop and the Game Stick, and Huawei has this thing called the Tron, and a couple of other people seem to have other little boxes, and there's lots of little ones, and God knows what they actually are, but they all seem to sort of share some really small kind of traits. And today I'm going to talk about that little big idea in general. I'm going to talk about the specific experience that we've had at OUYA, some of the ups and downs. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, true and false, that have emerged as a result. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I still very much believe in the idea, even though some people are a bit iffy about it, and like Keith over there, and why I think that it's actually still a really important development and something that everybody should be paying attention to in the future. So in order to get into what the big idea is, I thought I would start with a fairly obvious thing. When we talk about games console, what is a console? It's an idea that's been around forever and a day, but it's kind of worth restating at the same time. A console is basically a dumb games computer. Like, it's a computer that can take disk input and has joypads attached, and you can use to play games, but it doesn't really do very much than that, other than sort of maybe media stuff these days. It's, in terms of how most consoles are pitched, like the current two big ones, it's kind of like the IMAX of gaming. Like, consoles come across and, if you like, look, feel, and sound a lot like premium gaming all the time. That a lot of what their inherent message, if you like, is about is like the most blistering experience that you'll ever have. A game that, like Grand Theft Auto 5, for instance, that you'll just completely lose your soul in and is amazing. Or a game like FIFA Soccer that you can be participating in this giant soccer experience all around the world with, or that kind of thing. It's real kind of like high-end, completely uncasual type gaming is what console tends to sort of represent mentally. As a result, it's got a very exclusive sort of feel. It's sort of seen a lot as the domain largely of big players, people like Activision who can afford to make games in that environment, people like Microsoft who can afford to pay a studio or in fact own a studio like 343 and pay 500 people to keep making a Halo game for 4 years. Like, it operates on a very big scale, and not unlike Hollywood as a result, it is somewhat self-exclusionary as a result. And as a model, it seems very successful. It tends to dominate a lot of press. It tends to be very, what's the word? It tends to sort of sell a lot of kind of impressions of kind of what it is. It seems to kind of dominate a certain kind of conversation. And it seems to, particularly when big launches come around, it seems to sell quite a lot of units up front. So a good example is both Microsoft and Sony this year. They've had their new machines out for 3 or 4 months, and they've sold around about 10 million-ish of them between them. And fair play. Like, it's a, there's nothing, hello? There's nothing wrong with that kind of idea at all. At the same time, I question whether it actually is that successful, because while on the front end, if you like, on the vanity numbers kind of side of things, it can look very cool. All three major console makers seem to consistently exist in a world of like near total collapse. So everybody is speculating over exactly how long it will take for Nintendo to fall over. Microsoft just the other day has changed CEO, and the very first question coming out of a lot of its investors' mouths is, okay, when are you getting rid of all that gaming stuff, because it doesn't actually make any money? And Sony similarly regularly has very difficult conversations corporately about why it is that their consumer electronics business actually makes a significant and continuous loss. Is this hissing really badly, or is it just me? I can hear a lot of feedback. If I do a little, maybe it's the other mic. I'll try and move over here. OK, so a microconsole is kind of like a lot of things that aren't that type of idea. It is a dumb gaming computer, but it's a bit smarter. A lot of the, like OUYA, for example, are trying to enable themselves as dev kits in and of the box and allow a lot of things like side loading of apps and lots of sort of things that don't really commonly exist in the classically defined console. OUYA, for instance, pretty much actively encourages users to mod it, to break it open, to do what they kind of want with it, and to sort of treat it like a small kind of proper mini computer in some respects, a maker's hacker's box, rather than a sort of dumb entertainment sort of channel. They tend to follow, or they're trying to follow more of an aggregator model. So rather than like just premium vertical select titles that you get really pushed very far by big expensive publishers type of stuff, they're aiming a lot for kind of App Store-ish or Netflix-ish or YouTube-ish or Spotify-ish wide content plays. So lots of small games, lots of like indie-esque kind of titles, lots of retro-ish kind of stuff. That's the sort of pitch, if you like, that they're constantly making. They are trying to be very inclusive. They're trying to be very horizontal. They're trying to give a lot of support to, for example, middleware to be able to be used on the console. A lot of different engines and a lot of kind of encouraging developer communities to sort of talk to and help each other out and all that sort of thing. And as a story, it's really only just sort of starting out. I mean, the weird part of it is the Kickstarter for OUYA, for instance, was 1.5 years ago. But really, in terms of the life cycle of like a new idea, it's still very new. It's still very fresh, and it's still seeing a lot of kind of new entrants and new ideas, and like nobody's quite sure sort of what to make of what the final form of it is supposed to look like. It's messy. To put a long story short, it's very messy. There's lots of little entrants into the market. There's lots of, ooh, what is it? What is this thing? Who are these people? Why are they making these weird little game boxes? Like that kind of, that's the prevailing sort of mood still, which is great. It's fun. It's like anarchic and awesome. And it's happening against the background of a much more premium sort of story that's also happening at the same time. So Steam boxes are a good example. Steam boxes, Steam machines. Xbox Ones, PS4s, big sort of serious plays and stuff. And so the microconsole thing seems a little bit sort of off to the side. And so, but that's kind of good because it means it's getting a lot of time to just, if you like, sort of discover itself without maybe getting too much attention. So right, roughly speaking, that's what the microconsole idea is. It's kind of amorphous. Like I'm trying to convey the fact that it kind of is amorphous. It's not necessarily one thing or another. It's not sort of set in stone anywhere near as formed as the console idea sort of has been for a very long time. And so there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of mistakes to be made and lots of new things to be discovered about it. In our case, we've made a fair few mistakes and we've also discovered quite a lot of things. We've been in the market, I think, since July last year. We've had a number of the machines sold out, more than most people think. I'm not really talking about user numbers today, but more than most people think. And we've seen a lot of kind of fun developments over that time. We've had a lot of opportunity to iterate on both the hardware and the software, and a lot of opportunities to watch a lot of indie game makers try and make certain kinds of games work in that environment, and we're kind of getting all sorts of interesting bits of intelligence out the back end as a result. We've produced a couple of versions of the OUYA already. This is one that released last week. It's anthracite. Apparently, everybody calls it black, but internally we call it the anthracite model. It's got double storage and stuff like that. But it's had things like, I mean, we had, for the first version of the machine, we had a lot of issues with things like Wi-Fi signal, and we had a lot of issues with things like controller responsiveness and stuff like that. And we've been able to iterate on the hardware pretty quickly and on the software to try and resolve a lot of those sorts of issues. We're up to the point where we have 650 games. There are some people who think that the only thing that's ever happened on OUYA is Towerfall. They're wrong. Towerfall is a great game and it's sold really well, but it's not actually even the most played game on the system. Amazing Frog is. We've had big games that we funded quite a lot into to see if that sort of model would work, like Soulfjord, which came out 2 weeks ago and mixes rhythm action with roguelikes. It's kind of weird. We've had interesting little sort of kind of quirky projects like Chess 2 as well, where they're sort of trying to take, chess, it's a board game, it's based on David Sirlin's rules, and make it work within a console format. There's been actually a huge diversity of all sorts of different games have appeared on the system. We get a lot of experimental things from students. We get a lot of kind of sort of 2 and 3 week projects that people have just gone and got together at game jams and then just uploaded them to a console to have them sort of be playable by the outside world. We're in the advantaged position that we don't have a heavy publishing process. We don't really have like a lot of hoops, if you like, for people to get through. Essentially, it's just if you submit the APK to us and we QA it and verify that it doesn't crash or break the system, then good to go. You're able to just publish. You are now on console. And that's, I guess, a lot like the mobile model, but it's kind of helped as a result fuel just a lot of like quirky, weird, mad, mental games. I discovered the other day, for example, that somebody has uploaded a visual novel to our system. I didn't even know that it was there, and I was playing it like a proper Japanese visual novel, and stuff like that. There's just all sorts of mad stuff, and which is great. Like a huge part of the appeal for me on a personal level of this kind of idea is that we'd have a lot of diversity in the market compared to what I've often personally felt is lacking in console. We have 32,000 registered developers. Most people don't know that. We've got a lot of people from one man to small studios, people in Asia, people in Europe, people in America, Canada, Brazil, wherever, who are all curious and who've registered onto our dev forums and are downloading tools and all that sort of stuff, people buying OUYAs as well, and wanting to figure out how to kind of get into it. The fun thing I think about this sort of system is for a lot of people, and no offense to mobile developers here, by the way, but for a lot of people, particularly young developers, working in mobile is kind of like their day job, but they actually want to make console games. Or like that they kind of want to be able to do things with joypad stuff for personal reasons, because maybe that's what they grew up with, or they think that they can get better controls, or whatever. But there's just a lot of kind of on-the-ground interest. And so, yeah, so we actually have a lot of devs compared to what many people think we have. We've had an opportunity to produce, this is Jackalope, which is our most recent update to our OTA. We've been able to produce bring in a whole lot of kind of new features into the system very quickly, because it's very easy to sort of iterate in the environment that we work in, such as USB storage. You can now connect a USB drive to your OUYA and store as many games as you want on it. Such as a push. Most people don't seem to know that we have this yet, but there's a feature that we brought in recently where you could, for example, create an OUYA game, tweet about it, point to the link on our web store, which has a little button on it that says push to my OUYA, which will, if the user clicks, will automatically download and install onto their console the next time they turn it on. So you're hopefully kind of closing that web social connective kind of loop in a way that you don't normally get to do when you're talking about things that are off sort of web. We've got the Free the Games Fund stuff, which admittedly had a couple of issues when it started out in terms of how it was received. What it is a matching fund for games that are successfully Kickstartered, which if you sign up and in exchange for a limited period of exclusivity, we're doubling people's Kickstarter raise. We've managed to help 10 games raise so far, and they're not kind of cheesy stuff. There's things like Neverending Nightmares, which is a really, really awesome project that a guy's making all about his own battle with schizophrenia. There's the music game Centris, which is sort of the ambition that the developer Samantha Kalman has for it is to create a sort of a music creating tool that she sees could be used in everything from nightclubs to DJ nights to that kind of thing, which also kind of happens to be a video game, like that kind of thing. So lots of like just quirky stuff sort of all across the spectrum that we're kind of helping. It's $1 million fund, and we've actually only spent 40% of it so far. So there's quite a lot of, if you're interested, if you want to try and put together a Kickstarter for your game, if you want to try and help get extra funding on top of that, and you're willing to go exclusive on OUYA for a little while, come talk to me, because we're literally going, we have all this money, please, come, we want to give it to you, we want to give it to you. There's a lot of interesting sort of variation as well in terms of whether our games are kind of action-y, retro-y type stuff, like say Towerfall, which is just a fun game, or whether we're kind of doing some investment in kind of artistic style games as well. A good example is That Dragon Cancer, which is a very not in any way tending to be hilarious or entertaining game at all, about developer and his wife's struggle with the fact that their son has cancer and is dying of it. It's a completely true story, and he's putting it in video game form, not for fun and kicks, but because he feels it's an important project that he wants to do. And we're very personally proud to have helped to fund it and get it off the ground and provide a venue for it, which would not really be possible on regular console, or at least he thought and he felt it would be just too difficult to try and sort of get traction on. We also are finding, so like no word of a lie, OUYA is doing well, but we don't have like a million seller kind of game on the system yet. And I'm not going to pretend that we do. But what we are seeing, and what we are very proud of, is that the system is functioning as a sort of an accelerator platform for several developers. So a good example is Matt Thorson, who we helped get Towerfall out to the world, and Matt has gone on now and is bringing his game to Sony platforms, and he's totally thrilled about it. And we're totally thrilled for him as well. Like, we're not in the mindset of trying to hold on to things or like be particularly like iron gripped, if you like, about about what supposedly are the properties for our console type stuff. And there's a few of these guys like Feiju who made Amazing Frog as well. The fact that they're on a TV sort of platform that doesn't really have a lot of competition around it, and that sort of real people are getting to play their games, is helping to spread their word far beyond, say, the physical unit sales of our system, and therefore helping those developers get where they want to be. What's wrong with that? We love that. It helps us. It helps them. We feel that it sort of promotes OUYA as a sort of an accelerator platform, an early adopters platform, a student games platform, like lots of different things like that. And therefore helps to encourage more experimentalist kind of indies, if you like, to come onto the system, which again helps us back and forth. That's the whole pitch, if you like, of our console has been around that. Okay, so that's all fun stuff. There are definitely some challenges there. We do have some issues. There are some issues that are facing the microconsole sector in general. It is 1.5 to 2 years into the sort of cycle of it. There are some pretty serious questions that have kind of been raised around it. Now, I'm just going to rapidly go through them. Some of them are not real issues. Some of them feel like they are real issues. But we sort of take them as we go. So one of the not real issues is, oh my God, it's an Android system. Android must mean something. Therefore, it's all mobile games. That's not true. None of that's true at all. The fact that the systems run on Android is an operating system. It's like saying, you know, oh my God, the disk drive running program means that the system will only ever be capable of doing such. It's not true at all. Some devs do get hung up on this. Some tech journalists like to get hung up on it as well. But it doesn't actually mean anything in the real world to people who buy game systems or who want to play games or whatever. It's like, okay, it runs on Android, so what? What is an issue, though, on the other hand, is crossing over. Microconsole is a super niche idea at the moment in terms of who knows about it, who cares about it, who sort of has an opinion about it one way or the other. I'm not even talking about your sort of mainstream market. I'm talking about sort of going from, say, the innovators to the early adopters sort of phase. The crossover of the product, if you like, sort of gaining some amount of kind of solid geek traction in general is a big issue that the sector kind of needs to start to answer, I think, over the next year or two. Another false issue, nobody really cares about the processor stuff. There's a lot of kind of, again, there's fun speculation over whether whose Tegra is better than this or was this one based on that processor or whatever. We don't actually see on the ground in terms of people buying the system that they care about that at all. It's a different kind of dynamic than, say, people who buy PlayStations or something. They don't like the actual kind of on the garden or on the ground sort of customer doesn't give a damn. But getting to good enough, on the other hand, is an issue. So we've had a few examples, I can't say who, but we've had a few examples with noted game makers who really wanted to bring their game to the system, but they physically can't fit their game onto our system. Now, I'm not talking about big AAA level production stuff, but there's a few examples of games where it just doesn't quite work, or it just doesn't quite have a decent frame rate or that kind of thing. And so getting to the point where we're good enough for to be able to enable more game creators to bring their games to console, that is an issue. Heavyweights, what sort of Sony and what Valve are doing is not really as much of an effector on, I think, on what happens with microconsoles as people think it is. We're not actually competing for the same kind of customer at all. The sort of person who wants to buy big premium gaming wants to buy big premium gaming is what he's going to do. We're looking for people who have a different kind of interest. And typically, they don't actually have much of an interest in buying big console games in the first place. But sustaining developer empowerment, that is a big issue. Like there is a growing, or there could potentially be an issue as time goes on, where like mobile, we get so many people involved in, or so many people submitting games that curation becomes an issue, or ensuring that discoverability is maintained is an issue, or those kinds of things. Like we don't want to ever find ourselves in a position where we end up effectively de facto supporting like 5 devs, but that's all we can kind of manage. Another fake issue is the death of TV. So tablet gaming is very popular. Yes, it is. Mobile gaming is very popular. Yes, it is. Does that mean people don't want to use televisions anymore? There's not really a lot of sort of backup evidence, if you like, for that. People don't watch TV as much as they used to, but they do use their televisions for other things. So the fact that a microconsole connects into a TV, great. Everybody happens to have a TV. And they're not getting rid of them anytime soon. But broadening the appeal is a big one. So getting microconsoles out into other countries, getting them into other territories, getting them into Asia, getting them into Brazil, getting them into other parts of the world where the fact that they are low cost, for example, might really seriously help to drive their adoption as opposed to expensive Western consoles and all that sort of stuff. So I'm very nearly done. Sorry, I realize it's kind of going a little long, but there's a lot to try and cover. So right, should you buy in? Let me sort of rephrase that a little bit. I don't necessarily think, for many people in this room, it's probably not quite the case that they should take their 50-man dev team and start making microconsole games. I don't think anyone's ready for that yet. Microconsole is not like mobile was to social. It's not like it's not at the point where it's the next hyper-accelerating platform that is allowing big studios to dive from one crowded market into another virgin territory. It doesn't have anything like that scale at the moment. So if you were looking at microconsole and thinking, 2014 in mobile is going to be pretty bad, maybe we'll make a big play into microconsole games, you're probably going to find it very difficult to replace the level of, if you like, installs from one to the other as you were sort of hoping for. It's more likely that it's a good platform to make sort of long-term low investments in. So, take 2 of your developers, have them work on some prototypes and push them out to microconsoles and see how they do. Absolutely do a lot of that. Do a lot of very small scale stuff. Do a lot of just, one man and his sort of crazy little game idea that happens to sit in the back of your studio that he just wants to put into Joypad. Do that and figure out if that'll actually work for you. And if you have something that's a little more significant, then by all means come talk to us, because we are looking for decent content. We are looking for the right friendships to have. We do want to encourage everybody to try and make microconsole games as much as possible. We do have things like the Free the Games Fund, as I mentioned, but we've also done some amount of content deals before. And by all means, come talk to me. And that's it.